Hello everyone, I'm Rick, Voyager Home Inspections. I'm here today with Kerry from Firehouse Fire Protection Systems. And today we're going to give you a little education, actually Kerry's going to give you a little education on our fire suppression systems. So Kerry, pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely.
So will you do us a pleasure and walk us through our fire suppression system at this house?
Absolutely. We can start out here where the incoming water is.
Excellent.
Now, typically on these systems, the water is going to come directly from the meter, and the first thing it's going to run into is a shutoff valve. We call this a combination or a main shutoff. So when folks have a problem in their home, either something with their domestic, something with the irrigation outside the home, or maybe a line in the fire sprinkler system might have started leaking, this is where they would shut it off. This is a combination shutoff valve. So we want to make sure that valve is working. So we want to operate it a couple times a year to make sure it's functional when you need it. We are, by code, supposed to be the very first T for the fire sprinkler system, so the system gets the first water. So no other water is stealing it. In the event of a fire, we can still get that put out.
So like our irrigation system, we don't want our irrigation system getting it first, because if the irrigation system, breaks, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is configured properly. This is your PRV. In this case, the acronym stands for pressure relief valve, or pressure regulating valve, or pressure reducing valve. There's two different ways that plumbers look at this. This is a plumber item. It's adjustable, so that adjusts the water pressure for the domestic and for irrigation. But we want to see street pressure. We want the most pressure, basically, that we can get for our fire sprinkler system. And a lot of folks will ask me, what's it supposed to be? Well, depends on what the street pressure is that they give you from the city. So you're kind of restricted to that. But if it's over about 140 psi, that starts to be problematic. And if it's under about 50 psi, that's problematic. So we want to be somewhere in that range. Hopefully between 80 and 120 is perfect.
Excellent.
Okay.
Now, on systems, should we have a secondary shutoff valve?
A lot of times people have what we call a vacation valve, and that would be best located right here. And by current Scottsdale code, when we put in a new system, which we install new systems as well, they put it this way. We want a shut off before RT and a shut off after RT. The ideal place is here so that you can shut off your domestic water if you were to leave town, like on vacation or something. And that way you still have your plants and your irrigation will stay alive, and your fire sprinklers will protect your home.
So not required, but recommended.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent.
So from here we can go on inside if you like, and we'll look at the fire sprinkler riser receiver.
Excellent.
So this is where the control valves are. And in a residential setting, the first device that we're going to have in line, you can't see in the video, I'm sorry about that, but it's behind the wall. It's called a check valve. That check valve has the function of allowing the water to flow one direction only and not allow any of this trapped water that's up there for a period of time and never touched, usually, to get back into your potable water. So those check valves, it's important that they operate properly, and we'll be testing that today.
Excellent.
Okay. The next device in line is called a flow switch, or a water flow detector switch. Now the function of this, there's a paddle that sits inside the pipe, and as the water flows, it pushes on that paddle, closes the contacts, and rings this fire bell. Let's take a look. So this is your fire bell. That fire bell, it's crucial that that does operate when the fire sprinkler system flows. I've seen cases where that's saved people's lives. And I could go into more detail about that, but suffice to say that is very much an important part of the fire sprinkler system. It needs to ring.
So what you're saying is that this bell doesn't go off if I burn Thanksgiving dinner and the smoke alarms are going off on the inside. The only time that this bell is going off is if that contact is activated, which means that there's water flowing through the system?
Exactly. You have an isolation of systems here. So this is going to be our fire sprinkler. If you were going to run your irrigation, that should not impact the bell whatsoever, or anything in your domestic is not going to impact the flowing of the bell. Strictly the fire sprinklers.
Excellent. So, and one more thing that we have on the outside that's part of the system is this little kick-out plastic 90-degree PVC. And what's that for?
Well, this is your drain. It's the main drain that we'll see here in just a second. You can open up that main drain and the water's going to flow out here. It's there for maintenance and to obviously keep the water outside the house when we're doing any draining or maintenance.
Excellent. So we should never see this one dripping at all.
It should not be dripping. This one was dripping for a period of time. As you can see, the calcification right here on the outside of the 90 and some here, and that means that it was dripping for a period of time. And the reason for that, I'll show you inside.
Excellent.
So when I came to this system to look at it to determine what was, correct or incorrect, the gauge was the very first thing that needed changed. No gauge in the country, whether it's residential or commercial, should be more than 5 years old. So to meet that code, I wanted to make sure that we changed that gauge, and then I also put the date of the date that we changed that gauge, which was August of this year. So in 5 years, for sure, we want to make sure that that gauge gets changed again. The item that was leaking was this PRV, and in this case the acronym stands for Pressure Relief Valve. It's very similar to the one that's on the water heater over there. You see the pressure relief valve on the top?
Yes.
Most people are familiar with that. It's identical in that it does the same function. When the pressure gets up to, in this case, 175 psi or higher, then it's going to open up, bleed off the excess pressure out that drain from 90 that you just mentioned a moment ago. So this was leaking, and then that was what was causing that calcification up there. This main drain valve here, in this case it's a ball valve, this also comes to the same point. And so either one or sometimes both of these are defective, and in that case I usually have to rebuild the riser and replace both of those components to resume the integrity of the water.
Now, earlier you were talking about operating the valves to make sure that they work. Is this one of those valves that you operate, or you kind of leave this one alone for the professionals?
Actually, that is correct. I would prefer that you not operate this valve, not because you shouldn't, and not because it shouldn't be operational, but in many cases it's been sitting for years and years, and as long as it's not leaking out there, I don't want to see people cause a problem for themselves and cost extra money. So you really don't need to operate this valve. The only thing this is going to do is it's going to ring the bell by way of the flow switch. It's going to operate that check valve, but all of the rest of this trapped water that's in the system isn't going to get flushed out. So the maintenance aspect of this, once, twice a year, is to flush the system. Especially in Arizona, we have a lot of particulates, calcification, microorganisms in the water, and they go after any metal that they can find. So if you move that water through the system on a regular basis, you're going to decrease the chances of having things fail like your PRV, the main drain valve, or other components in the system.
So when it comes to this area, for the most part, homeowners, they're just doing a visual inspection. They're just opening this up, looking for any sort of moisture, any sort of that calcification buildup around our valves or any sort of connections, but they really don't have to do anything in here.
They don't. And not all systems will have a gauge. If it is grandfathered in, I call it, and meaning that the time that they required a gauge was before the time that the system was installed, then they may not have a gauge installed. But for the most part, they can look at the gauge and make sure it's not out of date. A lot of the gauges have a year on them. Make sure it's not out of date. Don't see any rust or corrosion or anything like that. And that, again, that valve out there is not leaking outside. We want to make sure that stays. Excellent.
You want to run us through how fire sprinkler heads work?
Sure. Now, these are spare heads. And the reason these are here is by code that you have at least 2 spare sprinkler heads representing one in the non-air conditioned space and one for the air conditioned space.
So if you have 2 different types of heads, you should have one of each.
Yeah, typically there's one of each. In this particular case, they use the same head throughout the home, and that was allowed at that time. Now, this particular type is the brand name is a Viking. It is a fusible link type head, so at 162 degrees, that head will deploy by virtue of solder that melts at that temperature. Then it'll release the mechanisms and allow the head to deploy. At that point, you get about 30 gallons a minute hitting a deflector that spans out in about a 10-foot radius, and it will only act individually. So if you had a fire over here in this area, for example, one head would deploy, the other head would only deploy if that head was overcome. If that sprinkler was overcome by the fire, then the second sprinkler would deploy.
So not like the movies then?
No, they're not all going to go off.
They're not all going to go, just the one that's being affected by the heat.
Exactly. It's a very local.
Excellent. And just to kind of give our viewers what it looks like when it's actually installed. So, and then as a homeowner, we can go ahead and look for any sort of water staining or anything.
Right. Well, when I do an inspection, what I'm going to be looking for is painted heads.
Okay.
Those are not allowed by code because they compromise the sprinkler's ability to operate at the temperature that it's supposed to operate at. So you don't want any sprinkler heads that are painted. If a little bit of the trim is painted, I don't necessarily call that out because that's not a life safety issue.
Okay.
It might be aesthetics, and maybe they want to update that and get a new piece of trim on there. And we'll help them with that. But for the most part, we want to look for, like you said, staining, corrosion, paint, installed in the incorrect position so you don't have the coverage necessary to put out a fire, those types of things.
All right. Should I hang anything from them or tie any balloons or anything?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, you do not want to touch them. You don't want to fuss with them. You don't allow the painters to run across them. They are a fragile device, and you want to make sure that they're maintained by a qualified company.
Excellent. All right. Did you want to talk about maintenance?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
now we can show you the maintenance aspect. Once we pipe a system, this is where it starts, and this is the control. Now it runs a main piping throughout the home. This particular one is CPVC. There are different materials that are used in different types of systems, but this one's a very common one to be used. So once we've piped all the heads and the sprinklers are in the right place, in the very most demanding area, we bring a pipe out and a valve, and we call that the inspector's test. So now we have the water piped outside the house, so we can actually flow the system, maintain it, and test it without having water in the home, without, damaging or worrying about touching any of the sprinkler heads themselves.
Excellent. All right, Kerry. So as far as homeowner maintenance of the system, we're going to do a visual check in the garage, look on the outside for that drain to see if that drain is leaking, and what else can we do?
Well, when you come around here to this side of the house, it's usually the most demanding area where the fire sprinkler system has been piped down to a valve that we call the inspector's test. The inspector's test has a couple of different functions. One, as you said, is for maintenance for the homeowner or for a technician. And the other is when they first install the system, it's required for us to flow the system and see if it is installed properly with the right size piping, the right amount of water pressure is flowing with the residual flow pressure that we look at on the gauge over there with the system flowing. This is a somewhat typical inspector's test that we would see on a residential setting. They have piped it. Here's the outlet for the inspector's test. It's reduced to a 7/16 orifice. Therefore, it's emulating a fire sprinkler going off or deploying. This one is placed behind an access panel, which is fine. And then this is the actual valve handle that you see. So the homeowner is probably going to want to put on a glove or something so they don't get insulation on themselves. And then they're going to operate this valve. When they operate this valve, water is going to be flowing outside that, coming out of this orifice right there. I'm not going to flow it at full flow because this one is set up and it's right by this air conditioner. It's just going to blast water all over us. But it is something that you want to do once, twice a year. And this is going to flush all that water that's just been trapped for a period of time in that fire sprinkler system and get it out of the system. That's the main function. And when you do close it, you want to close it slowly so that you don't create a water hammer condition within the pipes.
And then, how long should we flow that for? You said twice a year?
Twice a year is a good maintenance schedule. Once a year at least on a system that's working well. And for the length of flow, depending on the size of the home, if it's 2,000 to 3,000 square foot, for example, 30 seconds to a minute is good. If you've got a 4,000, 8,000 square foot home, you want to flow it for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, something along those ranges. That way you have enough time for the whole system to flush.
So nothing crazy, just enough to get that water moving and get some of that bacteria and all that out of there.
There's two main things you want to see when you flow your inspector system. You want to see a really good hard flow of water, emulating about 30 gallons a minute of flow rate, and you want to hear that bell ring. That bell over on the other side ringing, again, is very important with that. And this is how you test it.
Wonderful. All right, so Kerry, you explained to us about the homeowner maintenance, but as far as professional maintenance, how often should we have professional maintenance done on our fire suppression systems?
Well, as the city doesn't really have any codes requiring maintenance on the fire sprinkler systems in a residential setting, they do in commercial, but for residential, there is no real code requiring maintenance schedules. I prefer to leave it up to the homeowner, but I'll discuss it with them in such a way as I will say, well, at least every 5 years, if you have a gauge, we need to come out and change that gauge. In the meantime, if you're maintaining your system properly and you're keeping an eye on everything, that's up to you, up to your comfort level. We recommend larger custom homes once a year, once every 2 years.
But no more than 5. At least every 5 years, we need to get somebody out here, a professional, to take a look at our systems.
That's true.
So, and if you just moved into a house where you've been in a house and you don't know when the last time it does, we should definitely get you out here and take a look at our systems. Just give it a good once over.
We offer an annual inspection from our company, and for that we come out. I spend up to an hour with folks, answer any questions they might have. I go through the whole system, basically what we just discussed, flushing it, checking everything, and making sure that they're aware of what the system can and can't do and should or shouldn't be doing.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Kerry. And for everyone at home, again, if you haven't had your system checked in the last 5 years, you just moved into a house, etc. So Kerry and Chris, they've been around since 2005 doing fire suppression systems. They know exactly what they're doing, have all the top credentials. Feel free to give them a call. I'll add a phone number and a website for you as well. And again, thank you, Kerry, for coming out today.
Thanks, Rick.
Appreciate it.